Coming in person, or he's not? Okay. I just didn't say his face. That there'd be no speakers.
No, no, no. So good morning, everyone. It's a hard time, 9 o'clock here and Friday, but it's a great pleasure to have you here in Madrid on the venue here, but also for the online participants here. our title for this morning session is a fair data quality management and research metrics. So with the three important projects or concepts in this for the research ecosystem, I would say, we decided a little bit to have more focus on the FAIR principle, and especially with the focus on semantic artifacts. So this is a quite interesting tool or kind of an environment which covers the cross-domain aspects here. So yeah, my name is Chris Schubert. I'm responsible for or one of the representative of the EOSC task force on fair metrics and data quality. So as a co-chair, more or less responsible for the data quality subgroup here. I'm located in Vienna at the TU or Technical University at the library here. Together we organized this session or described the program with Mike Brady from DANS and with the support of the EOSC Future project, Andreas and Peter. We prepared also an accessible session document here. You can use this link. And yeah, for this, it would be nice if you can indicate your participation with your name and the contact. And also if you have some question, this question you can also use this use the chat function in the Zoom from the participants. And our focus for today is our structure here. We have two talks, one from Mark Wilkinson and Clément, and then with this we decided to have only two presentations here and let more space for a common discussion with you. And it's the reason why it's, of course, to get also your feedback and to enrichment our agenda, either for the task forces as well for the ongoing and running projects here, what issues can be solved and can be touched or should be touched by us and the EOSC environment. Yeah, in the end there's huge number of running project. I'm not able to step in each one and get really an overview here. One aspect we are dealing for, especially with Mark also as co-chair here and for the EOSC task force on fair metrics and data quality. We have a group of experts here dealing and discussing with this issue, and in general, so we have a formal feedback given in these kind of reports, but in the end we need, or this is also my wish, much more interaction with ongoing projects, with ongoing work packages here. But this is a nice place to continue this conversation, to have it. So I will go back to the presentation or to the agenda, and I want to hand over to Mark Wilkinson here from Madrid for his presentation on this fair assessment, and a little bit provocative title probably, but where do we point? There? Oh, there? Oh. Okay. All right. Down. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm sure if you've been attending this meeting, and to anyone who was at the Fair Ease meeting a little while ago, this is largely duplicative. I apologize. A little bit longer, a little bit more meat. But I'm sure you've spent the last few days listening to stories of success. And so I thought I'd change the tone. Now, failure is actually a good way to learn, right? And so I want to talk about failures and what we're learning from them and how we're trying to change the infrastructure and hopefully make it easier within the EOSC to achieve the FAIR principles as we had anticipated. So I want to talk about fair assessment, which at the moment is we say a cottage industry, and if you look at the Fair Assist website run by Susanna here, it logs 22 independent fair assessment platforms. Most of them are based on questionnaires, so they're manual, but there's several that are automated or semi-automated. But unfortunately, the outputs from these different assessment platforms can't be compared to one another. And so you say, well, how bad could it be? Well, this is how bad it could be. Right? So this is my evaluator, which was the first automated system created, and then Fuji underneath, being tested on a record from a FAIR data point. And the FAIR data point is software that was developed specifically to implement the FAIR principles. Right? So it was designed just for FAIR. So here's the same record being assessed by my evaluator, which passes 20 out of 22 tests, and Fuji, which passes 2 out of 24. Right? That's how bad it can be. Why is that happening? Right? So it's happening because there's a lot of ambiguity in how to get metadata. There's also ambiguity in how to interpret the principles. But if we're not working on the same substrate, we're lost. Right? So let's just talk about one approach for gathering metadata. So this is the typical DOI resolution. You have a DOI, you do content negotiation with DataCite, and DataCite returns you a block of metadata that it knows about that record. You then start again. You go back to the DOI. You don't do content negotiation. You just say, give me the default resolution. DataCite will then redirect you to, often, but not always, a landing page. Behind that landing page, there's embedded metadata. Right? And so if we look at, in more detail, in this case, they're using what are called typed links. So link, the relationship is alternate. The type is tab-separated value, or CSV, and the reference is this URL here. If you look at the documentation for the alternate typed link, the documentation says the alternate keyword is used with type. It indicates that the reference document is a reformulation of the current document in the specified format. What does my agent think when it sees this? It thinks that this CSV is a reformulation of the entire deposit, which it isn't, right? And so my agent is lost already. So there's a lot of sources of ambiguity, and remember, this is just one example, right? This is just the DOI. In the longer version of this talk, which takes 2 hours, I talk about the long tail of scientific data, scholarly data publication. And DOI is at the peak of the graph, but the long tail, these are non-expert publishers publishing in places that often they're running themselves, that don't follow good protocols, good publishing methodologies. So the metadata harvesting, the harvester, because I work primarily with agents, has to guess what to do at many of these steps. There's partial overlap between the data site source metadata in the case of DOIs and the Zenodo metadata in the case of Zenodo. The use of typed links is leaving some ambiguity because of different interpretations of the specification itself. The interpretation of the landing page is also ambiguous. Right? So some DOIs resolve directly to a data record. Some of them will resolve to the landing page. So is the DOI the representation of the record, or is it the representation of the landing page? And what is the subject of the metadata that comes out of the DOI resolution if, again, in some cases it resolves directly to data. Right? And again, my agent has to be autonomous. It has to make these decisions by itself. Right? And so there's these kinds of decisions are a source of ambiguity. Right? And finally, there's no way to support the most important stuff, which is if I did the experiment and I have a bunch of contextual metadata around my experimental data and I put that into Zenodo, how do you find it? You can't. Right? So we have no way to support provider source metadata at all. And again, this is just one example. Now, this is a big example. This is a pretty popular identification system, but it's just one of many. And so the EOSC set up this task force where one of the objectives was, please get to the bottom of this problem. Because everybody wants to encourage fairness. They want to make fairness a requirement, but it can't be reliably measured at the moment. So what does EOS do if they want to require resources on the Open Science Cloud to be fair and they can't measure fairness? So they set up this task force, and one of the objectives was to get to the bottom of this. And so we had a few hackathons, a few workshops, including all of the publishers of these assessment tools. And we said, okay, the first thing we have to do is find a straightforward, unambiguous mechanism for publishing metadata. And we call this fair signposting. It comes from Herbert van der Sompel at DANS, who has a larger spec called signposting. And so fair signposting is a smaller part of that spec, which just has the small little key components which are necessary for successful traversal of a fair record. That is an ambiguous identification of the globally unique ID, an ambiguous identification of the metadata, and an ambiguous identification of the data records. Shout out to all of the people who've been attending the hackathons. There are 2 more hackathons next week. If you want to attend, if you're a developer, not an observer, a developer, you're welcome to attend. This is what fair signposting looks like. So we say, we're going to use link relations. So just as you saw in the Zenodo page, we're using the same technology. This is not something we invented. This is simply taking a part of the specification and being really, really clear about how it should be used. So we use 3 relations. One is cite as, which is a one-to-one relationship between the entity and its globally unique identifier. That is, in this case, the landing page points at the GUID. Described by, the landing page points to every metadata record that it knows about. And finally, item, the landing page points inwards to all of the data items. Not even necessarily inwards, right? Because we're on a web. So it can point outwards to data items, as would be in the case of RO crates, which is a distributed publishing mechanism. Okay, so these links can appear in the HTML body, so the landing page, or if it's not a landing page, if it's another kind of digital object, a video, an image, a workflow, piece of software, it can appear in the HTTP headers. Same spec, same interpretation, different locations based on which kind of digital object it is. So we can use it for anything. So what does it look like now? So a starting point is irrelevant. Do a web search, bookmark, DOI resolution, whatever. I arrive here. In the background of that page, there are link relations cite as, that points to the globally unique identifier. There are link relations described by, which points unambiguously out to the exact URL that is going to provide the data site metadata. And then there's item links which point inwards to the individual records. So now the purpose of the landing page is unambiguous. The landing page is a broker. So the DOI represents this, not this. And importantly, now we can do this. We can add a described by link, point inwards to provider source metadata, which is magic, because that's the critical stuff, right? Again, you would probably want to use something like ORO crates here. Okay, so what about non-landing pages? Again, starting point irrelevant, web search, bookmark, whatever, you arrive at an image. Well, that image doesn't have embedded metadata, but in the headers, you have cite as, and there's the global unique identifier. You have described by, and here is the explicit reference to the metadata record for that image. And of course, there's no item because it is the item. Right. So we can now unambiguously traverse around the data ecosystem, always knowing how to get to the metadata, to the data, to the ID. So we've been as professional as we can be. So at these hackathons, we've been breaking up into two teams. The teams that are writing the evaluator software and the teams that are writing the benchmark test suites. And so we have now 34 benchmark tests for signposting, some positive, some negative examples, so that all of our software can rigorously be tested to make sure it's really behaving in exactly the same way, so that we really are comparing apples to apples, and we can go to the EOSC and say, these tools are reliable, consistent. And again, we're going to have another round of hackathons next week. Okay, so in the wild, signposting has already been picked up. It's in the 5.14 release of Dataverse, which is the version that is running on harvard.dataverse.org or dataverse.harvard.org. We're having a meeting, so Susanna and I, with the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative in October, and we're going to be presenting this idea to other key repositories like Zenodos and Figshares and so on. And it's very close to being implemented now in the FAIR data point also, in the reference implementation. Okay, so I'll hand over to Clément.
Okay. Okay, so we can work a question for after, or
I think yes. Questions and then comments after this Clément's presentation, and I would like to ask you, Clément, to say some words of your affiliation and your task and.
Okay, let's do that. So yeah, that's the second presentation, and I will put myself on the other side, physically and maybe in the speaking in the talk. So maybe trying to demonstrate or show how maybe fairness assessment can work also. So hello everyone, my name is Clément Jonquet. That's the last morning, and I know it's a little hard for everyone after all those networking and events and things. I work at INRAE in France. That's the research organization for agriculture, environment, and food, and we are doing computer science things there, methodology, and I'm doing work in the context of ontologies and semantics for a while on this there and before at the University of Montpellier. Today I'm going to present or mention so a sub-part of the problem of fairness assessment for a topic that we like a lot in the context of my research and the project that I'm presenting here also called Fair Impact, a project that you probably heard about now in the after those 3 days, are semantic artifacts. And it's a term that has been also introduced by Jan here in this same room at the same place, trying to encompass standard vocabularies, metadata standard vocabularies, terminologies, ontologies. We use that term to broadly identify those objects in order to show that the adoption of semantics, even if it's diverse and has similarities when we come to, for example, hosting those semantic artifacts as objects or assessing fairness. So yeah, you guys have my slide and have that, so I should be okay starting with that. So if there is one key message you guys have to remember from the session here is I mean, Marx did the FAIR principle, the semantic artifacts, the term used in the principle is vocabularies, but they're definitively identified as helping to make data fair. And those are themselves data, so they have to be fair too. So that's the message of the talk. So that's the specific principle mentioning that Marx and all papers on that. So now the question is really, I mean, how can we go from these principles to specialized criteria, questions, and that we can apply to objects like semantic artifacts and ontology, and so measure that level of fairness. So that's really the question behind. So, and I'm just giving a slide here with some reference, just in case the slides are turning around, just for you to get some of the reference. So we don't show up in Fair Impact that I'm going to say a word about it, just saying, oh, we are working on that now. I mean, there have been years of work at RDA in the context of the previous project called Fair is Fair also, where we're interested in different aspects of why do we need semantic artifacts to be fair, what's the requirement for that, and I'm going to come back on those requirements, for example, the fact of needing a harmonized way of doing metadata for those objects. And we also need repositories for that. That's going to be one of my arguments. So we published a paper also about 5 years ago explaining that a unified metadata model in an ontology repository like AgroPortal was important for making those objects fair. And eventually in Fair is Fair also, we also work on trying to find the minimal metadata that will be relevant to actually say something is fair or something is not fair. I mean, we kind of took the risk also to say that. And so now we continue this subject in the context of Fair Impact, which is one of the European project in the context of the IOSC program. In the context of Task 4.4, where we really focus on semantic artifacts, their life cycle and their catalogs. So we have several use cases working on portals where we host and discuss between communities how to exchange semantic artifacts, facilitate their governance, facilitate their reuse, etc. And we also do that a little bit in the work package 5 or Fair Impact that is also focused exactly on this question. Mike, being one of the organizers of the session, is also one of the coordinator of the work package. And some of this work is done also, of course, with folks that I mentioned here, but more. And one of the outcomes of Fair Impact recently is some kind of a milestone deliverable that says that that revise a methodology in ontology development life cycle and actually position the idea of assessing fairness in that design methodology. So this is a work mostly done by Daniel Garrido and Maria Poveda at UPM here in another department, Marx, but that's super close to you. And we try to say, look, now in that cycle of development where we have ontology implementation and then eventually ontology publication, I will insist also on that, then we can actually try to find the moment where it's appropriate to stop a little bit and then do some fairness assessment. And eventually go back. So we're still working a little bit on the arrows that come back from those modules, helping us to do the fairness assessment back to some of the steps, either during the development of the ontology itself or once it has been published or made available. So have a look at this document. We are already preparing a second version, but that's already an output that is interesting. So what I'm going to kind of present today a little bit is a methodology that we've built on our side, a little bit of before Fair Impact, to put in those boxes, or more especially in the second one over there, because that's the one we use after the publication of the ontology in a catalog. So I got this slide for now a few years. That's the one I was using to say that semantic artifacts need to be fair object, and I was illustrating here with screenshots taken from the portal that we developed called AgroPortal, which is a semantic artifact catalog for ontologies, vocabularies, all those artifacts in the domain of agri-food. So yeah, we did really, I mean, we think that by working on such platform, we make those artifacts more findable, more accessible with our APIs or endpoints, more interoperable by creating links between them, by mapping them, by describing them with standardized metadata and more reusable. And so the key point is that we're also doing this semantic artifact catalog in the context of an alliance that was also mentioned yesterday, also here in the session, where, I mean, if we join forces to develop those tools, then it will be relevant to actually deploy them in different communities. And we are also trying to do a little bit of that in the context of Fair Impact with that Onto-Portal Alliance working on different semantic artifact catalogs. So when we actually work on fairness assessment in one of them, then the goal is actually to show that we can apply these methodologies also in other domains. And that's exactly what we are doing in Fair Impact. That's exactly what we're going to start experimenting also with our fairness assessment challenge that we are running next month with selected participants that will come and evaluate in the context of those catalogs or other methodologies that I'm going to mention to the fairness of some of the resources that they will bring in. So, well, yeah, Fair Assist was mentioned when we did our state of the art about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. That was the 50 Shades of Fair. I like that title that was used by the postdoc doing that work in my group. And the 50 Shades really came from the different UIs that we saw in the state of the art also. So what I think was important, and I think it's a first distinction that I like, is that we noticed that there was some approach that will do fairness assessment at the generic level for any kind of research object, typically data set, but any kind of things that you can give a DOI. For example, Fuji will actually do that. You give it a pointer, and then it will do a fairness assessment, independent of what kind of object it is. Our vision, our perspective was really we want to do fairness assessment for a more dedicated kind of object, and we found stuff there. 2020 was really the moment in time where things switched. A lot of discussion in the context of RDA and Fair is Fair kind of made it happen. And so we found out some methodologies developed by UPM, but also Alejandra and González Beltrán and Simon Cox published a paper called 10 Simple Rules for Fair Vocabularies. And we were working also on our side. And we even discovered things that were actually very relevant for Fair, for semantic artifacts that were done before the Fair age, you know. Things like Miro guidelines, for example, were published, and they will literally tell you what to do when you report an ontology in a paper, for example, and what kind of metadata information you want to say. So this is the informal slide, and this is the formal one, just with the reference, the reference to all of this work. And what we've done in our study, I'll show you how we have reused this work and try to come up to a grid there in order to build that tool called here, OFAIR, that I'm going to present in more detail here. So we call it the Ontology Fairness Evaluator, but in the context of semantic artifacts, we can also apply it, or in the context of AgroPortal, for example, where it is deployed, we can apply it to several kind of semantic artifacts. Okay, so let's continue. So the objective there was really to develop a methodology and a tool to automatically assess the level of fairness, the level of fairness of any semantic artifact in a catalog. That notion of catalog was super important for us because there are some principles that you can really evaluate when you have actually published the data. If you only put the data online, well, I could say you could, but I think the part of also publishing data in a repository is part of the fairness, the FAIR movement. And the methodological aspect in comparison with the tool was that really we want to say, look, we don't want to restrict ourselves with the things we think are how to implement right now, even in the context of the platform that we had in mind, which was AgroPortal. Our goal was really to deploy something that we will put here and that would do the 50 Shades. So we're like, okay, let's think about a methodology, and we'll see later what can be implemented in that methodology. And today, the OFAIR is branded as the methodology, but also the implementation of the version 2 in AgroPortal, which implements something like 80% of the criteria of the question. So that was the approach, and so I came back to the state of the art slide that I was mentioning. We took those approach that I call here generic, like for example the FDMM, for those of you that are familiar, it's the Fair Data Maturity Model or the SHAR grid. Those approach that were also specific to ontologies for us, like Miro, and the one that were like specific to ontologies and came after the FAIR movement. We put all of that in kind of a methodology, something that we call a grid. The idea was to address here our first requirements. So the fact of being able to say, oh, if we want to compare fairness, then we need we need to see exactly how we're going to do in terms of methods. So it means that we're going to give points to some of the principles and say, well, here you're good, here you're not good. Here, I mean, that's a dangerous path, I tell you. So what we did is we took those approach and kind of built a grid like that. So the one you see on the top right corner is really the two approaches that are generic, and you can see that even those generic approach for fairness assessment already introduce a discrepancy, a difference between the fair principles. So you'll see that A1 or F1, for example, will actually be more emphasized by those methods when you do the integration and you look at the numbers of criteria they test and the numbers of questions they ask. So we did the same with the second slide here, did the same with the other methodologies that I show in the state of the art, and then we observed the same unbalanced situation like that. So some fair principles were taking over other ones. We also noticed that none of the methodology were addressing all of them. That was also interesting, that approach of saying, oh, by looking at all of these methodologies, we are sure that we're going to be able to cover all of them, even if maybe there are things that are less important. And at the end, we integrate all of that and kind of introduce what I call a baseline here. We'll say, okay, we're going to have 10 points for every fair principles, and then the other points will come from those methodologies. That will give us the grid. And that grid was the first thing that we published, trying to say to the world, now you can maybe implement methodologies, whatever the questions, whatever criteria you want to put in a fairness assessment methodology. Now you have a grid. You have 478 credits that you can dispatch on 15 fair principles. And I mean, you can make that in one test. Oh, do you have an identifier? Yes, okay. Then you got your 42 points. Or you can do that in 10 tests. You have an identifier. Is that resolvable? Is that a URI? Does this resolve with content negotiation? For those of you that are familiar with that, you can actually deploy that in more questions. And so, indeed, if you start thinking about all of that, someone will give you the 42 questions for nothing, and someone can give you the 42 points for a bunch of questions and hard criteria. Okay, well, sorry. So that's my first requirement. Usually I do that in 15 minutes, and today I'm like trying to dig into it. So that was that thing may bring us to something that we had the paper call from an expression of that I like from Jan. Am I fair, or am I even fairer than fair? And so we use that in the title, saying if we can measure the level of fair, where are we? I mean, before certain threshold, are we unfair? Before above that, are we fair, or even more fair than fair? So it's a little tricky, a little dangerous to go this path. For example, our colleagues at UPM, FOOPS, they decide they're not going to do this. They decide we're not going to say what is fair. We're just going to give them points, and people understand from those points if they are fair or not. And we went a little further and took that large space like that between two formulas that tell us if you're like that, then you're probably fair. And if you're under there, just get worried a little bit. You need to work on. You need to work also a little bit. So the requirement number 2 in our work was really we needed a projection of the fair principle for semantic resources. So what's going to be the questions for the criteria, the question, and so we did it. I mean, point by point. Here we use a lot of our expertise and history and working on semantic artifacts and ontologies, and we probably miss a lot of things. I mean, this is always a little bit subjective, but we made it to a point where we have 61 questions, and 4 of them are really dependent on the semantic artifacts, and 15 of them are like a little bit independent of the semantic artifact, and actually they can be addressed by the repository that you actually deposit your artifact in. So the importance of the role of the catalog. So if I give you an example here, we have the fair principle, the Q question number 2 for fair principle. 4 is the ontology repository and multiple ontology repository. Of course, this one is important for me. Are the ontology metadata of each version available? That's a point that is also mentioned in the fair principle, that metadata will stay. Versioning is also important. So say, what, do we have the metadata for each of the version? And if you find a place and you can demonstrate that, yes, you get those 5 points. And so the approach was there. We will took the points of the grid and then dispatch them as fair as we could on the question. But of course, the first thing that reviewers told us in the methods, oh, this is super subjective, guys, blah, blah, blah. How did you do the dispatch of the points? But we had to take some decisions. So we end up with those questions. You will see those on GitHub and in the paper describing how fair. And we did basically the sum of those That's a formula, guys. So, you know, when we come from a scientific conference, you need to have formula somewhere. So that thing tells you that you have a sum of questions, and on the score of those questions, you have a score for a principle. And if you do the sum of all of the 15 principles, you get the score of your ontology. No big deal. That's the maximum I can do in terms of formula. And so the third requirement was, well, we will not do that if we don't have a unified way of dealing with metadata, because I didn't tell you, but most of these questions were actually metadata related. So we wanted to check if yes or no an ontology will achieve the question based on the metadata field that will tell us, yes, I do it, or no, I do it. So we will put on the side the fact of, is that true or not? We'll just say, let's assume we have a metadata field that tells us, and if we do, then we'll have our test based on that. So we needed an approach, and on this we built on what we've done in the past, but in the past we work on that thing called MOD, and that we continue now in the context of fair impact, for a metadata for ontology description and publication. So this is an ontology to describe ontologies. And that work was done with also legacy of all different things in the past, because this is a subject that have been also followed in the semantic web area for a long time. And we end up here with a bunch of metadata properties that we can reuse for that. And that day we scared Jan that was kind of looking for the minimal metadata model, and then we were like showing up with like a maximal metadata model with tons of metadata that no one's gonna never feel. We know that, but at least they are here, they are standardized, and you can use them if any chance you want to say something about an ontology. And then we were able then to use them, and as I said, most of the questions in OFAIR are based on metadata. And what I use here are those little names that we use in the semantic web community, telling you that it will be the DCT description, the description property that come from Dublin Core. That's more or less what's telling you, just to show you that we actually did the work of specifying in the MOD the specific URIs that you have to use for those metadata properties. Okay, those for the 4 principles. And the final requirement was really, now that we have a metadata harmonized, then we need a place where those semantic artifacts will be deposited, and that metadata model will be available, and that metadata will be actually curated and verified in order to kind of be valuable for fairness assessment. And that place for us was, of course, AgroPortal. And we started to work on metadata in AgroPortal 5 years ago, and now we are trying to set up those, curation procedures following philosophy. I mean, not philosophy, but the same approach that folks are doing, like, for example, in fair sharing in Susanna's group. And we are trying to do our best there to actually harmonize that metadata and make it like very diverse when it comes in, unified when it's in the system, and then services or fairness assessment methods, other services can use that. And that was the paper presenting that shows that we were able, even before doing OFAIR, to see a lot of things related to the semantic artifacts in our community thanks to that study. And so that's also an argument that also say, if you actually deposit them in catalogs, then you really share also the methods that you have used, the network, or you connect to the others and things like that. So, well, with all those requirements, then we developed that methodology called OFAIR, and we implemented the corresponding version in AgroPortal. So as I said, yeah, it's a web service, so you can call that as you will do with Fuji or something like that, and the web page corresponding is available in AgroPortal. What I like in OFAIR is that you can select. So that's the web page, the welcome page in AgroPortal that will actually tells you the average, minimum, maximum, and median scores of all the ontologies in the portal. So we compute that every night, and every morning we have a web page that tells you the score. And what we did when we released OFAIR, we took a dump of all of the metadata and all of the fairness assessment of AgroPortal at that time, and then we start talking about it. That's 10th time I'm showing this slide, trying to say, people, we have that. And then we had a student who came and started contacting the users, and we say, we'll come back in 2 years and compare that those fair score that we had in AgroPortal at that time with the one. We kind of kick off that things, and so if you go online, hopefully everything will work. I asked the team before just to be sure they everything. But basically the demo will look like that. You have a place where you can get the fairness score for a given ontology on a specific ontology page. And for those of you that could see here, we have those greens and gray parts. The gray part means that it's not really appropriate, and the yellow part in the middle tells you that the methodology of OFAIR will actually enable you to evaluate or go up to that level, but not the implementation in AgroPortal. So it means that to get rid of that yellow part, we need to improve a little bit the implementation in the portal. That will come in the future. So you can get the fairness score for a given ontology in AgroPortal. Of course, if you click on it, then you will get all of the 61 questions and the reason why we will give you that score or not. That's the demo thing that actually creates a huge amount of why did you do that, etc. But every time we kind of show that's the feedback we have, and so we show you the property that was actually used and the question, and so we show you if you succeed in a specific test or not. And the last thing is getting I think it's important also for people working with different groups of ontologies or developing. We have some work on governance, and we know that working on different groups of ontologies is important. So you can also get the fairness level of a certain group of ontologies. So if you see, oh, I really want to see the fairness level of all of those ontologies, for example, in the Obo Foundry that this group is developing and are paying a lot of attention to that, then you'll go and you can ask AgroPortal, give me all of your resources that you have in the Obo Foundry with a certain form, and get the fairness level of all of that and see how it evolves. I'm almost done there, showing that it's also a service in the backend. Of course, the key idea here is to automatize all of that so tools can actually consume that information. Those of you that are familiar with things like JSON will notice that it's a non-made JSON. So next step, we've been talking about that. Some of us, Michel, has been doing a pre-proposition for that eventually we'll have a standard to describe fairness assessment results. And the day we do have such a standard, then we will be able to compare them more easily, and then on our side, we'll return that in that standard format. So next week, I forgot to put that in the slide, but next week we are kind of starting, actually not next week, in 2 weeks, starting a fairness assessment challenge in the context of fair impact, where we're going to show people these slides, and we're going to show them 2 or 3 or actually 6 other methodologies for fairness assessment. Some of them apply to semantic artifact, 3 others, and 3 others don't. And we're going to tell those groups, bring us your semantic artifact, bring us your data set, and we'll do fairness assessment for you over the next 2-3 weeks. And the challenge approach of the challenge is that we want them to measure the fairness assessment when they come in, and we want them to measure the fairness assessment when they come out. And if we have a little difference, and that difference is positive, we're good. And the higher you got a bit positive difference, the better you are in the challenge, let's say. We did that last year in the context of an hackathon. It was fun. And people were like really pretty excited about filling in this metadata field, you know, the 128 ones. But people will play the game a little bit because of the fairness score, showing them the results. We do what we can. Well, conclusion is OFAIR is an approach built from other methods and contribution. I think that's really important that with that grid that I show you, we took, so it's not isolated. It shows that different approach of fairness assessment can be taken into consideration, and I also like the idea of being able to work with generic things and more specific things. And so we have that grid. Of course, the question can be changed and added, removed without changing the method itself. I mean, you can keep that and you can say, oh, from 61 questions, I want to go to 65, or I want to go to 80. And so you'll refine the methodology, and eventually where you will give 5 points, then you will give 3 points there and 2 points there. That's up to your specific thing, but that's customizable, and I think we can move on or with such method like that. So we have that web service to plug in in ontology repositories, and I will actually betray some colleagues that have been working in the semantic in the OntoPortal Alliance these days, trying to get their version of OFAIR working in their semantic artifact catalog for the workshop that I was describing a few minutes ago. So we're going to have OFAIR now run in EcoPortal, in Industry Portal, but also in Earth Portal that is also coming soon. So that really means that the tool could be now used and then eventually modified by different communities. And all of that, I mean, is done in order to have those fair ontologies. That the main goal, just to do all of that exercise, all of that challenge, all of that metadata editing, just to have fair ontologies, so they will eventually respect the principle that say that you should use fair ontologies. And I think that's my last slide.
Yeah. No, thank you, Clément, for this comprehensive, detailed, and very interesting insights of your work, and I think it's quite helpful also to boost a little bit this discussion here. So, but is there? Yeah. Then we can start immediately with our discussion here. So. Yeah, it's a good opportunity here to take your question raised for Mark's and Clément's questions. So you have the privilege to start immediately, Mark. Yeah.
I'll go after the audience. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm Baptiste Checconi from the Paris Observatory in France. I'm part of the Fair Impact project, so I had some contact with the Fair Checker tool developers. So it's not exactly about ontologies, but the same kind of tool. So I checked my landing pages for the small repository I manage. At the beginning, it was not working so well, but I'm a lazy scientist. I just use what is available. So my data is in a data site. I just take the schema.org JSON, and from data site, I put it on my landing page. And this is not good for your Fuji assessment system. It was not good for Fair Checker. Now it is. They fixed it. So I wonder if you are in contact with the like data site or other managers of DOIs to make sure that the metadata they provide, which is a help for the providers, that they are already compliant as much as possible with what we should do to be fair with our resources. So that's my question. Just a little remark for you, Clément. Maybe you should think of a more inclusive design for the colorblind, because it's very difficult to distinguish your green and yellow. Sorry.
I mean, so I mean, the whole question about metadata alignment and the importance of metadata is super important. And for example, right now in OntoPortal, we are working to be sure we're going to have an extract of the metadata that is compliant with DataCite. EcoPortal has done that to be sure that they can ask DataCite to DOI. And so we should be able to say, oh, if we have a method that is actually based only on DataCite metadata, that method should be able to run on them. I will just say, yeah, the specificity of the tools that seems to be also important there. So Fair Checker or Fuji are also generic tools that you've tried there. Typically here, for example, OFAIR was not applicable, and the fact that it's on an ontology repository makes it unapplicable to things that have not yet been loaded in the portal. So for us, it's also a security to say you're not getting crazy results with something that is not even a semantic artifact for a tool that was designed for semantic artifacts. And I just want to mention last year that Alban the developers of Fair Checker came to the workshop that we organized in Montpellier, that Fairness Challenge. And he came back with the idea that he wanted to have different flavors of Fair Checker that would be more specific for different kind of research objects. So he's been working since then. I haven't seen him in a year, but he's been working, I've heard, on trying to make Fair Checker more with, I don't know, dedicated questions or criteria for some. So I think showing the developers of those methodologies that sometimes you think it doesn't work, which is completely okay feeling, then it will help them to improve them, including by making them more specific. Yeah.
I'll just add to that. the DataCite team was invited to the previous hackathons. They attended some part of it. They're watching us for sure, and we're in communication with them. You mentioned Fair Checker, and that just reminded me of a level of the problem that I didn't address, because I only addressed the metadata harvesting. I didn't address the actual tests, which is the subject of the next two hackathons. But so if you look at the distribution of tests, and this came out in your talk, the distribution of tests among the F, A, I, and R between the different tools. So in Fuji, there are lots of tests for R. And in my system, there's almost none, because I think R is difficult to measure. Right? It's very community specific, right? And so I don't try to test it, but Fuji does. And so we have a huge discrepancy because we have different weights of the different principles. But if you look at Fair Checker, so I was reading Fair Checker a couple of months ago, the Zenodo deposit, and there are tests in the A's that I don't think are A tests, I think they're R tests, right? And so the level of disagreement on the interpretation of the principles themselves is another source of the discrepancy between the different assessment tools. So we have a long way to go, I think, in assessment. Does anyone mind if I ask my question now that I've got the microphone? So, slide 22. No, you don't have to go to it. You don't have to go to it. Slide 22 was the first time you mentioned the word assistance. Everything else was score. And I am desperate to get us away from scores, because scores are just not helpful, right? And so every jet in my boat is now pushing me towards providing assistance to help people get better, rather than saying you're 20 out of 25, right? Thank you. and so I mean, you have come up with an incredibly complicated scoring system, and I'm going in completely different direction. So do you think that it's because you have a smaller focus, right? Your semantic artifacts are a much more constrained field, so maybe scores in that case, because it's so constrained, is more useful than in a broader sense of all digital objects. What do you think?
Yes, the debate on assessment and assistance. We started the debate. You convinced Carol on that, so she showed up in Fair Impact and say we don't want to use assessment anymore, and we have to use assistance to actually embark people in the fact that they need to be a. So I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, as I say that on my last one, on the 24th one, I said all of that is to make ontologies fair objects, and even the challenge in the score, that wording goes with the idea that you confront yourself as a developer or something to something that is trying to measure and telling you something about your work. So of course someone can take that as a bad judgment, or someone can also use that as a way to improve. The key idea is of course to go the other way, and I think yes, the fact of being a little bit more of being specific allows us to kind of go this path. But we know we take a risk. We know we take a risk because when you decide that you give 5 points here and the 3 points there, you take the hat. But when we never kind of argue that we're gonna give you the fairness level, the ultimate fairness level, unique and the respect of that. And we believe that fairness or fair is also a question of interpretation, a question of context. And we said, well, in the context that we propose in this, with the test that we have published, that you can compare on, and you can eventually say a few words on, those are the choices that we have taken the responsibility to make. But I agree, the reviewers were like not easy to convince on the fact that it's sometime at the end when you have those 20 points that you need to dispatch on 4 questions, either you do 5, 5, 5, or you introduce a little bit of subjectivity and you say, well, I like the idea that URI will be resolvable. I'm going to be 3 more points there. And the fact that the metadata of the record that was there 2 years ago, etc., that may be also. So you take some decision like that. And that's why I say we try to also detach the methodology itself and the grid system from what we have done in AgroPortal and in OFAIR, just to avoid that situation. But overall, yes, we even discussed the way we're going to run the challenge next week in the context of Fair Impact. We say, well, we use the challenge for people to come in with a score and then come out with another score. And if in between that score have changed, we're good. We've accomplished our mission of trying to help them in the fair journey.
No, thank you. I will also take this comment from our online audience, Romain David, fully agreed with this questions on here, to be more supportive in implementation, and he is, it's beginning of a fair literacy in the end, yeah. So I will come to next, Lars, yeah, okay. Please.
So Lars Holm Nielsen, Zenodo and Søren. So I'm going to ping the question back to you, Mark. because of the assistant. So all your systems, they evaluate me as a repository. Like they just test it. But how do we help these researchers that haven't learned to spell fan capital to become more a system in what they should be doing in the repository, right? So my question is, what should I be doing as a repository to help researchers become more fair?
So I mean, there's several layers to that answer, and I think that one of them is that the reason that we came up with signposting was so that we could say this is a really low, a least common denominator that everyone can adhere to fairly easily. And I've looked at the Git commits from Dataverse; they're very tiny. It was not hard to implement this, and it's sorry. Okay, excellent. That's good news. I want to talk to you about that. So this is a really.
Yeah, yes, because the battery is low, so
okay.
he won't feel it.
Okay. So I thought my battery is low. Yeah. So I think that's one thing we could do, right? So whatever you're currently doing, no problem. But this is an unambiguous way to solve a really critical problem, right? And the other thing that I would suggest repositories do is now that it's possible with RO crates and also with signposting, make it really encourage your depositors to put their own metadata in, because that's the critical stuff, the stuff that interprets the nature of the data, the meaning of the data, right? The data site metadata doesn't do that. And there's just no way at the moment to really get over that hump. And so RO crates gets us part of the way there because they have a predictable file name. So we're part of the way there, but it would be better, right? If the depositor could point explicitly, they don't have to use RO crates, they can have their own specs, the ISA or whatever, and make it more networked. I can point outwards, not just inwards, right? So I think I would become more webby and follow just this simple design pattern of the identifier metadata records. That would be my suggestion, but support provider metadata.
Yeah, please, Wim, can you?
Thanks, Wim. Hugo from Dance. So 2 comments, one on Lars's question and maybe Mark's response in respect of how to assist the depositors. We're strongly advocating and started working on assistance with fair evaluation and supplementary guidance at the time of deposit, because that intervention is sorely needed. We can't curate legacy deposits forever into a higher state of fairness. We have to catch the process when the deposit happens. And of course, many of these things need to be automated because we are facing an increasing number of automated deposits that never go past a curator. So I think it's critical for repositories to look into assistance at the start, at the deposit point, to increase not only fairness, but also other community expectations, maybe in respect of trust, ethical conduct of research, and so on and so on. So I think that's the one comment I want to make. I don't know if Mark wants to.
I do want to respond because I agree entirely, and so I've got several responses to that. So I agree entirely. One of the reasons for the design of my evaluator was that every test is independent. They're all published independently on different locations on the web. They're not actually part of a big software suite. And that was specifically so you could hit individual tests at any point in your publication pipeline, right? And we're going to use that. Susanna and I have recently got funding, and we're going to start putting this into the data management plans. So at the time of planning, yes, you get to check how you're doing. right? You get to check which repository is going to be best for my data object, right? So we're going to really embed testing on a modular basis into the entire pipeline of publication.
And then maybe just a second comment, more broadly in FAIR Core for EOSC, of course, we are developing the compliance assessment toolkit, and it's focused on EOSC PID policy compliance, but in the design of the information model, we looked much more widely, including all kinds of FAIR assessments, assessment of trustworthy repositories, and all kinds of other assessments. And what has come out of that, and which sorely needs testing and feedback from the community, is a more defined model of what exactly do you mean with a criterion and a metric and a benchmark and a test, and how are they related to one another, and how does that link into guidance and best practices? Because in the toolkit, we are also focused on this idea of, yes, we can evaluate or assess, but if you don't perform adequately against the benchmark, what should you do to get to a point of adequate performance? So I'm not sure how one goes about it, because the FAIR Core for EOSC project doesn't have the resources to reach out and broaden the scope of our engagement. But we maybe can look in the FAIR Impact project to see if we can't gather a little bit more of a community involvement there.
Yeah, so I have two responses to that. How are we doing for time? We okay? Oh, we're okay. All right, good. So I have two responses to that. First is, so as I indicated, I am turning all of my jets towards assistance. The way that I envision that at the moment is that every test is going to be linked into a repository such as Fair Sharing that says, right, here are the known standards that could be applied to your test. And we could even go farther than that and go into, so from the Go Fair group, they have the FIPS, Fair Implementation Profiles, which are a matrix of different communities, the principles, and what is the solution adopted by this community. So if we know your community, we could actually go even more precisely and say, that's what you should be doing to be most interoperable with your community. And so for certain, it's already being coded, the next generation of my evaluator will do exactly that. I'm already writing the code now. Second, all of this requires, as you said, that we actually trust the tests themselves, right? And so what I'm hoping is going to fall out from the next two hackathons is the skeleton of a governance system where we say, right, the way that you, in the future, on a community-specific test, you say, right, here are the metrics, I'm going to put them up for peer review. And so some body, who it is going to say, right, here are the experts in the domain, here are the FAIR experts that are necessary, here are the coders. We're going to come up with the metric, we're going to come up with the design of the test, and we're going to build the benchmark simultaneously. That will go through a peer review process, and then we'll say, right, that test passes the benchmarks, but I don't think that we're going to have the authority to say, this is a fair test. But we can at least say it is backed by this pathway to publication that people should have faith in, because we have the benchmarks, we have the peer review, and there could be many bodies that go up and do this. This could become a commercial activity, right? That you could become a fair blessing organization, but you have to at least have these. Yeah, I know. You have to at least have this level of professionalism, right? So I don't imagine that EOSC is going to say this is a fair test and this is not, but there will be a pathway for publication of fair tests that people can trust or not.
And here I would also use this opportunity to you document and what you produced in this task force for the governance model here. So I think it's quite important to mention this, yeah, as well. And it's not a question of a central authority, yeah. So but the responsibility on the individuals.
I have a comment on my side on that. I mean, there is a word that your side also that you're using also is that notion of test. But either we do it for evaluating or for assessing or assistant, we use the notion of test. And then you make it, you talk about a governance and an approach of, well, this is something we've learned also everywhere. Every time you do a test, then you create the cheaters for that test. So that goes on, and if you come to AgroPortal, you put a record, and you go and put, like, you open the metadata editor, and you put whatever you want in there, like a cooking recipe, which in the context of AgroPortal could be a good metadata, but whatever you want to put in some metadata fields, in some cases it's not going to work. You're going to fake the system. And so do we need to actually have our tests create some, being validated and create more trust into those tests, just to actually play hide and seek with the ones that will be like, all of that is to also help everyone improve their own resources. So I do agree that the fairness assessment or evaluation could eventually be useful for others to say, oh, I want to use that because I believe it's fair. And I agree also with the fact that it could be a dangerous path in terms of fundings and all of that. I haven't observed that for the moment, but for the moment, I think the key message of fair assessment is really do it for yourself, see how you can improve, and how it can help the journey on improving your. And yeah, we're not, on our side, we're not going to be able to face the cheating approach, that's sure. It's not, we can handle that.
I want to follow up on that because at the Fair Ease meeting, just before this meeting, this topic came up, and one of the audience members asked a question. They said, is fair testing relevant at all, or should we be entirely use case focused? Because if your system doesn't solve a use case, then its score is irrelevant. Right? And I think that that's getting a little bit to what you were saying, is that the purpose of all of this is to enable interoperability. And we haven't proven in any of our tests that we're actually enabling interoperability. So I think that a future generation of tests needs to do that.
Yeah, Thomas.
I would like to go back to the discussion about the interoperability of different tools, because you said that there are different interpretations of how they measure A or I or R. And then now we have a discussion about also whether we should give scores or not. So are we actually able to have any kind of interoperability between the FAIR tools, or this is something we should forget for the time being because we have to sort out all other topics? So if we have some interoperability between the tools, what will be the overlap? What will be the common thing?
The overlap, if we had interoperability, there are. I don't know if I'm answering your question there, but you tell us. But there are definitively some aspect that wherever you go on the hierarchy of digital object, you're like data set or super high, or you go down to things like semantic artifact. There are aspects, and I think also you guys have been also working on those tests. You're like checking if there is a license, checking if there is an identifiers, and that identifier result. All of that applies to any kind of object in the hierarchy of those classes. And so the overlap will probably be every time you can put a test at a certain level in that hierarchy of digital objects, then you're overlapping with you have an overlap between the fairness assessment tool. So in theory, I would be pleased to have another approach in something like OFAIR that I call specific. We'll say, oh, we do evaluate with something generic, or like Fuji, we got a score out of that, and then we had another fairness assessment that we call specific. But we don't test the URI anymore, we don't test the license anymore on our side, because those things, and the technical reason we haven't done that, because eventually you want to have something in the portal run, but that would be a way to go. I have one general comment also to that question of interoperability of our tools and making them more convenient, extra. And I just want to repeat a little bit the system here. And we have also, I don't say that but last year we ran an hackathon. We invited those 25 persons. They came with their things. They played the game and they tried to improve their level of fairness and all of that. And they were. The event was super positive also, but we get also the feedback that, guys, your tools are so different, and and sometimes we need to send the URI, sometimes we need to give the URL of the page, and it's super hard for us to blah blah blah, etc. And so go back and do some homework on all of that. And I was like, I just spent a month organizing this meeting We just work with this guy, trying to help them improve their things. I'm just being not really paid for that because the project is ending. And well, one of the key feedback we also get is that guy is going to go and correct your copy. I agree with that, but we also have to understand that, I mean, this is not Google doing a fairness assessment tool and you can say, oh, if you don't do Google, I will go to Facebook. This is us. I mean, we are in the research community too, and we need to get the funding to do all of these. And so, yeah, we can make the perfect fairness, fairness assessment tool that will all align, and if we have only one fairness assessment tool, then it means that we have only one interpretation of fair. But you also have to, yeah, we are also in that situation where we try to address some specific problem for specific communities and move on step by step in the context of, you know, research funding, research and things. So I was thinking eventually that in Fair Impact we'll take all of the 4 fairness assessment tools that we had, because when I set up the work package, I call out of them. And it's been a year and a half that we talk. We haven't done that yet. We've created other things, discussed, but taken our own 4 methodology and then fully aligned them in order to, at the end of Fair Impact, say we're going to have only one for semantic artifact. I don't even think it's going to happen anymore. And I don't even think it's bad. I like that diversity also. And
I just had this idea that sounds like a lot of fun, and if anyone wants to do this with me, let's go. So in the text annotation community and in the protein folding community, they have these challenges, right, where there is a gold standard, it's hidden from the participants, they have their algorithms, and they all come together, and they try to solve the problem, and then they get scored. We could do the same thing with interoperability, right? We could create a grand challenge test and then have a competition between the agents, right? That would be a lot of fun. And I think it would really go a long way to improving how we navigate through the data space. So if anyone wants to do that with me, that would be great.
Right.
I can't remember what these challenges are called. Okay.
Yeah. We can take it to our agenda. Yeah? So it's good. Yeah, I will hand over to Wim.
Yeah, just a quick comment on tests. I mean, the point of tests is that they can be standardized, and you want tests to not become more and more divergent, but for all kinds of specifications to converge on using the same tests. I mean, 150 years ago, the sugar content of wine was tested in a million ways, including dipping your finger and tasting it. But they have sort of concentrated into maybe 3 tests that are standardized. And you can reuse those tests in many contexts. That can be in more than one tool. But the point is that we should guard against having different tests for the same thing in different tools. The gold standard, as it were, would be to converge the number of tests that we execute.
Do you want to answer that as well? I'll go first. So, okay, so again, multiple responses. So I don't mind having different instances of the same test, Python, Ruby, JavaScript, right? As long as they are all behaving the same way, right? But I agree, and that is where a governance body would be really helpful. A governance body where there's a core group of FAIR experts who know the entire testing environment and say, no, that test already exists, or something similar enough already exists here. So I think that that's another argument for some form of governance. And again, I don't like that word, but organization.
So I just want to say a word about that notion of test and the way we could actually deal with our developing methods for that. And it was obvious in front of us in the meeting of Fair Impact, talking about all of that we will use tests, and some of us are like technical, computer science background and things. And eventually the expression came out of Alejandra Gonzalez Beltran and say, wow, what we need is actually maybe what we might need something like test-driven development. So those of you that are familiar with coding, developers are crazy enough that eventually they invented test-driven development, which means that they will first implement a small test, they call that unit test, when they want their software to actually be compliant with. And they will not go to bed until the light is red for the test that being passed. And otherwise it means that the software is not good. It doesn't actually, And so we were like, well, we need to do, instead of thinking fair by design, which was the expression that we were using originally, maybe we should do fair-driven development, test-driven development for fair. And so we'll say, look, you have a system where you will implement your research digital object. In our case, for example, it will be sometime Protégé for developing ontologies. And then in Protégé, you can have a tool that will tell you, that will give you like, boop, 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 you say, and the developers will like be based on the test, either tests that are made to be very specific and that haven't been checked by anyone, but that are just helping the developers to get a better way of designing his research object or ontology or another one, or tests that have been decided and governed that can be actually validated and actually agree some label on.
I think the non-developer version of that was already suggested, and that is that as you go through the deposit, it's getting tested as you go through the deposit, right? So it's test-driven deposit rather than test-driven development.
Yeah, but I will jump in also to the tests here, and one comment from Romain David regarding tests. So it's why not, or is it sufficient? But why not also to add some quality information, to add some community information or community approval, yeah, on artifacts, for example.
Can I ask my question? I was actually going to say, I don't know who raised the previous point. I don't quite agree with the idea. It's really hard talking with this thing. I don't quite agree with the idea of having fewer tests. I agree that tests should narrow down on the type of tests that they're running. So they're looking, for example, at the semanticness of the fields and the values, right, rather than just do they exist or do they not. But different domains really need different tests. They need different things to be checked, particularly when it comes to provenance. And not just different domains, but different types of data, different purposes of data. So you need to test this in the same kind of way, but you need to test different things. And that's not existing at the moment. You need, for example, a test to be able to plug in a template from domain X, data type Y, and then it runs the same test methodology, but on a different template.
No disagreement. But I think that kind of thing can be dynamically looked at. You can have one test. Which community are you from? Microarrays, proteomics. Go to fair sharing, I pull out the spec, then I test it in the same. So we're sort of going that direction anyway. That's sort of community specific, but not at the level of the test, the level of the spec that's provided.
So I'm going to jump on that to actually pass a message to Mark that I have for years, and which is, I mean, I put them on, and you know, so I put them on to be sure we read them right with Mark, but you know them by heart. But I mean, R 1.3 is metadata meet domain relevant community standards, and in some part, I mean, that's the fair principles that gonna tell us, well, there are gonna be some new episodes to all of that. That's why I sometimes call the fair principle the episode 4, you know, because we know there have been things before, like in Star Wars, and there will be more episode after that. And because of R 1.3, we know that there are going to be another episode, and I agree with that the test will have to be somehow dedicated to some specific object, some specific communities, because of that sentence here telling us there are some specific community standards, and eventually we'll have to do that. So yeah, so let's get ready for episode 5. And eventually we need to go back to Roman's question online. Yeah, we sorry about that.
Yeah. It was not a question, more a comment.
More a comment.
More a comment. So I didn't see a question mark here. Alessandra.
Okay. Hello. Okay. So I think in the case of semantic artifacts, things are a little bit easier. And I would say that OntoPortal and the OntoPortal Alliance are actually the demonstrator of interoperability. So they are repositories that try to connect with an ontology, another vocabulary, and so on, to put them in a repo. If the test to connect fails, you have to look at your tools and find more creative ways to connect with them. And also, maybe there is something that is not fair on their side. So you don't need that many tests on your side to make your connection with an ontology or a vocabulary that doesn't come easily into the repo is already a test that something is wrong, either on your side or on their side. On the fairness, because that's an interoperability test, really.
So, any other question? Yeah, Ilan.
You work only on metadata, but in real life, for example, in big data, you have a lot of APIs which use also metadata for call some. If you want to extract some part of data from one distributed source, but also for this you need test. You need to test operations. You need to test, for example, if you have census, if you have authorization, authentication. Also for this, for these things, we need tests. Yes, but you don't work on this area in your yes.
So those kinds of tests would go into the A's, and I think the reason that I have not implemented that is twofold. One is that most of what I'm exploring is public, or at least the metadata is public. I have very few, I think I have only one, maybe two tests that attempt to reach the data. So almost everything that I am testing is metadata, and most of the time that is public. In the project I'm involved in now, the providers are so nervous about their data that even their metadata, they want to be protected by AAI. Right? And so that gets a bit tricky. The second part is that if I'm building a generic agent, my agent needs to discover the authentication mechanism on its own and somehow invoke that. And that's tricky, right? So it's difficult to test that because I can't, in a generic way, create a generic username and a generic password or a generic token that will work on your resource. So I can only test my own resources. Which is why I have a commercial tool, by the way, so you can bring it inside of your firewall.
So just to tentative complement on that, also kind of building on Alexandra's remark also before, in the idea of having things that works or not, and going back, when the idea also developing those repositories that on our side, on our case, that onto-portal network in which we will and going back to your aspect, for example, related to access, is that, well, you also say to the developers of the ontologies, and even more to the users of the ontologies, by dropping the ontology here, you actually, you don't have to deal anymore with some of those fair aspects, or including, for example, all of the one that I call the HTTP hidden ones, the one that really call for, all of that should be based on HTTP, but we cannot say HTTP in the principles, you know, or on the web in general, but those are the questions that I said that are not ontology specific in my presentation. There are a few questions that once you have dropped your ontology in the portal, well, you just got a bunch of points or credits just because you did that. First, because now you have your ontology in a repository, and we give points for that, and also we can push the ontology in other repositories, and we can give points for that. But also because we support authentication, we support so someone can access the resource or not. We can access the resource metadata or the resource content with our authentication. So users or developers of ontology, they don't even have to deal for that anymore. They drop their ontology in a repository that actually handle those aspects of the FAIR principles, and then they are good. They only have to focus on the other question, the one that are really ontology specific. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine, due to the time. So I would ask you to provide your links for the next community events you have in plan. For the next community events, like a hackathon and so on. I will put it here in our document. We can also add it on the slides afterwards. So, I would like to to give an applause to our both speakers and for you, I hope we had a fruitful discussion and we can continue in the break here. So thanks a lot taking part on this really hard morning session here at this time and by end of the week here. Yeah. So enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you.